Welcome to this seminar that will be run by Ryke and Susannah. I will be introducing them. So,
introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. I also work for the Council of Churches with Susannah at the Eco Justice Connection. I'm Ren Martin, our Eco Justice Program Coordinator. I started just last summer, so I've been here almost a year, and it's been fantastic working with everyone. But yes, so on to the main show. Reverend Susannah Tuttle is the director of the Eco Justice Connection and North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, which is an initiative of the North Carolina Council of Churches, which addresses environmental justice and climate justice issues as a moral imperative. Susannah received a Master's of Divinity with an emphasis on ecological ethics from the Graduate School of Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Susannah is a founding member of the Southeast Faith Leaders Network and is an active member of the U.S. Climate Action Network. And then, Ryke, if you could stand up so just people can see you. Ryke Longest currently serves as the Director of Clinical Programs, the Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Clinic, and as a clinical professor of law at the Duke University School of Law. He supervises students practicing in the clinic and teaches the seminar portion of the clinic. Since coming to Duke, Longest has served as a founding director of the Environmental Law and Policy Clinic, a joint project of Duke Law School and the Nicholas School of the Environment. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you,
Ren.
And it has been an absolute pleasure and privilege to work with Ren. So if you haven't gotten a chance to meet them, I hope you will introduce yourself. So welcome, here we are. This is exciting to get to be a staff person and give a session, but mostly because my lawyer is here. So we're going to talk about what that all means for all of us on behalf of the Council of Churches. So just as a little bit of a grounding, when people talk about how do you constantly work on the causes and consequences of global climate change with such a hope-filled spirit, we often refer to this as what we call the What I Love campaign. And we have developed a lot of messaging using for the love of this world, for the love of our children, for the love of our oceans, for the love of our families, for the love of the garden. We have lots of resources that Ren is continuing to help develop. So more on that as we share information that can be used by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Big picture overview. Many of you in this room are familiar with our work around advocating with compassion. It's really the pedagogy that we've designed to be a different voice in the spaces of advocacy that is truly based in love. So this is some of our mission and vision: to educate, inspire, and mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And we envision a stable climate where humans live in right and just relationships interconnected with a healthy, thriving, natural world. And advocating with compassion is absolutely rooted in justice. It is the prophetic work of speaking truth to power, holding tension, and treating all with dignity. This is the work we do every day and the work we call onto others. And many of you have heard me say over and over, and 2 years ago when we gave the Faith Active and Public Life Award that we're giving to Governor Cooper today, we gave to Administrator Michael Regan, who had been the Secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality. And I actually got him to quote me back to myself in the award ceremony, which was, "As people of faith, we speak the truth and we seek the truth." And so it is grounded in that work of justice and truth-telling that we move into the work. So again, here we are back today at the Legislative Seminar. I'm going to do a really quick and dirty, fast, busy, long session for legislators. These are some of the primary bubbles that took place in the way that laws were clustered, in themes. The Medicaid expansion, as we know, is something that was agreed to but directly attached to the budget. So this is complicated cycle about what's going on with finance right now. And we're going to zoom in on energy policy today and what's going on in relationship to current legislation and where we've come from through legislative processes to get to where we are in the North Carolina Carbon Plan now. So again, this is a hard slide to read, a really big snapshot, but when you look at the amount of bills filed to date, that was 1,639. Apparently it was one of the largest filings of any session ever, when actually a lot of folks thought we'd have a fairly quiet session. We're actively monitoring many of bills. I think this number at the end of how many months we have left in the Cooper's term is very important because we're already, as we know, in the next election cycle. So that's something to keep in mind about how we message, how we reach out. And I want to just highlight SB 512 here, the greater accountability for boards and commissions. When you see something filed by Senator Phil Berger, that's a very influential bill. And it would change appointments and power for certain boards and commissions. Ryke's going to talk about this because he understands the law a lot better than I do, but it directly impacts the North Carolina utility commissions amongst taking power away from the governor in a lot of other areas as well. Friends in here have been working very, very hard. Shout out to all of the members of our volunteer energy working group with the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. Our chair of the working group, Gary Smith, is here. We've been working really hard on a bill that somehow has been kind of under the wire with different advocacy groups, a little slow to start, and now everyone's realizing the impacts of House Bill 488 that would prevent efforts to update the energy codes until 2031. And all that the council is weighing in on is that it would bring us in line with 2021 standards. We're willing to go back 2 years to the standards of 2021 because we have to improve upon our current codes, which are essentially from 2009. If we don't wait until 2031 to address this, we have some major, major, major losses in the areas of helping the people that need energy efficiency the most, where funding's going to come from. And I have good news because I serve on the President to Duke Energy's Advisory Council on behalf of the North Carolina Council of Churches and all of our congregational facility spaces. I always say we have millions of congregational square foot facility space. So we're a big user, we're a big customer for the utility. When this was brought up at the recent meeting, they had not been tracking this bill. And so it's exciting to think about how they could get involved because it really impacts how they have to provide energy if we don't make our buildings more energy efficient. So I'm hope-filled about that.
But I'm just thinking about those of us who live in communities with huge housing mushroom growth going on. So that what I'm hearing you say is that those houses that are being built are essentially adhering to codes from 2009.
Right, that's the maximum that they have to do. If a developer wants to go above and beyond that and make a green development, they can do that. They're not, it's not illegal to build beyond the building code, but we need the codes to be the requirement. It's such a low ball. And our biggest opposition from this is the National Home Builders Association. They came in from all over the country and dropped in and said that they do not want this to happen. So yes, it creeped up us, but we have a couple of weeks. This is a live action alert from North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association that I just got yesterday. So when you get this slide deck, you will get and hopefully fill this out and send it around.
Not only are they cutting swaths of tree land to build these developments, they're also adhering to codes that are over a decade old.
That's exactly right. Okay. And wanting to make lots of profit off of it.
This would help deal with that, but on your local level, can your planning commission or city say, well, you can't do this unless you have more, I won't say up to date.
I don't believe that there are local ordinances for building codes, so, no.
Also, I don't think that the legislature allows you to be more than the statewide. I'm not sure about that. But a comment about the code though. Homes would be 16% more energy efficient than they are now with the new code. Big deal. That's a lot of money, a lot of carbon.
That's exactly right. Which is why, great segue, the current legislation that's moving through, and the Senate bill that I mentioned around changing how commissions and boards work, and what would happen with building codes and other pieces of legislation. I didn't highlight on the previous slide that the other bill is that is very interesting to follow is SB 678, which is promote clean energy. Also sounds like a really good idea. Filed by Senator Paul Newton, very powerful person in the Republican Party, which would redefine renewable energy in the state. And that has huge implications as to what we can do within the carbon plan in relationship to actually having renewable energy in comparison. I'm going to let Ryke talk about all that fancy stuff. So we get to this, a conversation about the future of our energy. I think a lot of you have been on webinars with us. Ren and I have done multiple webinars. Ren has testified publicly at hearings. We are a formal intervener of the carbon plan docket at the Utility Commission. So just if you're not up to speed, here's my fast and furious. How did we get here? So in October of 2021, Governor Cooper signed House Bill 951 into law. I will say the Council of Churches had a statement and went on and received national press by the Associated Press because we opposed the governor signing this bill into law. It is now law, so I can't argue with the fact that it happened, but if you're interested in the history of why we felt it did not meet the needs and requests and requirements for low-income communities, we worked very closely with the North Carolina Justice Center on this, and so we were very disappointed that this was signed into law, but it's law, so we have to work within it. What got into that bill, which was a good thing because it was a huge, massive piece of legislation that got them multi-year rate making, Duke Energy, all this stuff, but we also got a North Carolina carbon plan written into that piece of legislation. So that was to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 70% by 2030 and go carbon neutral by 2050. And that was in direct correlation to Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80. And so that's part of why the governor agreed to signing this into law, because the carbon plan intention is to meet his own goals around reducing carbon emissions. To monitor progress, the Utility Commission must submit a carbon plan every 2 years. We're already into the second year since 2021. Ryke will talk about that. The Utilities Commission is responsible for the plan structure and content requirements. And the first thing the Utility Commission did was pass it back to Duke Energy and say, you're the one that has to manage the grid. You write the plan, which inspired over 45 plus groups to file as legal interveners in the Utility Commission docket. I think that was unprecedented before, how many agencies. And I was so grateful that the Center for Progressive Reform, which is a national organization, identified North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light and the Council of Churches as an ideal candidate to represent low-income communities, look at issues like energy burden and what we prioritize. And they said, there's this really great guy over at the Duke Law Clinic at Duke University. And I said, is it Ryke Longest? And they said, yes. I said, yes, we will, please. And Ryke will, thank you, is offering his own time, pro bono, has been an amazing resource. So I cannot give you enough love and grace for your commitments. And so the first version of the plan was reviewed in December of 2022. We're currently in the process of combining Duke Energy's IRP, Integrated Resource Planning process, which is what they used to have to do before the carbon plan existed. Now we have the carbon plan. Now we're in the process of creating the CPIRP. It's all a lot of paperwork. And right now, I just want to, before I hand this off to Ryke, to talk about environmental justice and why we do what we do. There is another action, just like I gave you with the building codes action, to submit public comments to the public staff of the Utility Commission. I already have a drafted outline of how you can submit. They really need to hear from us because Duke Energy wrote the proposed rules for how this is all going to run. It's sitting in front of the Utility Commission right now. We have until May 18th, which is on Thursday, to submit comments. So North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light has already submitted a comment. The Council of Churches has submitted a larger comment, and you have a chance. Hopefully you'll go home and get this in your inbox tonight on how to do this. Because guess what they did? They left out stakeholder engagement as in the language of the rules. And unlike the carbon plan, which and the IRP previously that had to be submitted every 2 years for review, the rules are the rules. And the rules don't change. So the rules will be the rules 10 years from now and 15 years from now. And we need stakeholder engagement to be in the rules in order to be able to hold the Utility Commission and Duke Energy, more importantly, accountable for getting community stakeholder engagement. So with that, these are just all of our values. You can learn more by going to fossilfreenc.org. We are active part of the North Carolina People's Power Plan. These are what we think should be in a carbon plan. We care about energy burden. This map, I can talk more about it another time. And then importantly for us, we don't want any more fossil fuel infrastructure in North Carolina. So this statement from the Council of Churches was published in 2017 when the Atlantic Coast Pipeline Duke was trying to bring the Atlantic Coast Pipeline along with Dominion Energy into our state. And so our governing board published this statement opposing fracked gas pipelines. This went to the governor's office. It's been all over the place. And it was an important piece for us to mention with regards to our commitment to justice and environmental justice and climate justice in our docket that we filed in our intervening filing. So with that, I hand it over to the one, the only, Ryke Longest. Professor, doctor, reverend.
There, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. No doctors. I'm just here really for two reasons. One is I love and admire the work Interfaith Power and Light and the Council of Churches does. Also because I am a recovering Presbyterian and a current United Methodist. I think I need to drop the recovering Presbyterian because it's been a long time. But
Governor Cooper's a Presbyterian, so don't.
I know. I don't have anything against Presbyterians. I was raised a Presbyterian. My wife was raised a Baptist, Southern Baptist. We met in the middle and became United Methodists. And since then, everything else, the landscape around us has changed significantly. But we love our church. We're members of Eden and Street United Methodist Church. So it was pretty easy for me when I got the call from Susannah to say that this was important work and stuff that was definitely worth my time. So I want to talk a little bit about energy justice and climate justice, which I think of as being subsets of this thing we call environmental justice. And really, what is environmental justice, if nothing else? It's just justice. It's just justice that is looking in specific ways in which our lived environment are impacting us positively and negatively. One way in the law that we look at this really dates back most recently to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And there had been an earlier Civil Rights Act that was passed after the Civil War, but was struck down by an activist Supreme Court. That Civil Rights Act being struck down helps us remember that activist Supreme Courts have been around for a long period of time. In 1964, we had the Civil Rights Act forbidding that there be intentional exclusion or discrimination against any person based on the ground of race, color, or national origin. And this covered any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. That's important because the Utilities Commission receives federal financial assistance. The state of North Carolina receives federal financial assistance. Just about every state agency receives some form of federal financial assistance, and nearly every county or city of any size also receives federal financial assistance. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was designed to make all government agencies at every level make civil rights be part and parcel of their business. Now, it is limited in this context to race, color, or national origin, but national origin is important in addition to race and color. And then there's also this 602 section, which deals with setting up implementing regulations. Federal agencies that give out money have implementing regulations, and those regulations prohibit not just intentional discrimination, not just George Wallace standing on the steps of the school saying segregation now, segregation forever. That was obviously illegal even at that time. The courts held so. But now it's also if there is a disparate impact. That is to say, if you have what appears to be neutral basis for your action, but it has a disparate impact, people of color are disproportionately burdened by it, then that's illegal under the implementing rules. The Environmental Protection Agency has weighed into all of this by defining environmental justice helpfully in a way that is, for lawyer language, actually not too bad. What I just showed you in the title, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I pulled out in the red because a lot of it is very lawyerly language, and I'm doing the same thing here. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. See what EPA did there? They added income into this so that from their perspective, social justice is included, not just civil rights. Because there is not a Civil Rights Act of 1964 opposition to discrimination based on income. But in the EPA's definition of environmental justice, it's there. And then this one is important. How are they going to achieve this goal? When the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work is achieved. So they have a very lofty set of goals in the federal government when they're thinking about what we mean when we say environmental justice. They want to see that people are getting the same outcomes. So they're drinking water, for example, that's clean and is not going to make them ill. They're going to be not exposed to industrial pollutants that are going to make them ill. And the same thing is true also with respect to the process. They're going to be able to actually participate in these processes. Now, in the law, we have legal scholarship that has broken this down into lots of technical legal stuff. I'm going to throw this content up here in part because you're going to get these slides later, and some of you might be interested in it. Essentially, what this is breaking it down to is to recognizing there are four aspects of this. Distributive. How is it that we distribute positives and negatives from the things that we do? Electricity is a good example. Electric power is a necessity for people to live a modern lifestyle. Without electricity, you're essentially living in a way in which we were living 150, 200 years ago. You need it for heating, you need it for access to the internet, you need it for your phone, you need it for employment opportunities, really to receive notices or even to participate in our government. Electricity is a necessity. So distributive deals with that. Procedural is how do we get involved? How do we make decisions? How do we actually get our voices heard? Corrective is a recognition that sometimes past injustice, things that happened, for example, that violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964 but occurred before 1964, have still not been corrected. And then social justice, which is looking at a larger lens. How do we not only think about the things that are illegal, but the things that are wrong, that are unjust? As we know, in the 1500s, pre-contact, North Carolina was home to many linguistic families and communities that identified as tribes. The primary three linguistic families, the Iroquoian, the Siouan, and Algonquin, lived all across North Carolina in varieties of different groupings that were often referred to as nations or tribes. They had complex social hierarchies and political infrastructure. They also had a network of roads, many of which travel some of our roads today. So if you all go on Trade Street in Charlotte, you're actually on an ancient Indian trading path. It was the great trading path that started down in the Mississippi Delta and passed all the way up into the Great Lakes, runs near through Salisbury. That's Trade Street in Charlotte. Now, with Indian communities in North Carolina, the indigenous communities in North Carolina have not disappeared. These are recognized Indian tribes, state and federal, in North Carolina. In addition, there are urban or Indian organizations that are represented in the yellow. So these are people who identify as indigenous, who have American Indian ancestry, and who do not live in an area where there's a traditional recognition of tribal sovereignty. Geography of slavery is really important to think about in this context. North Carolina, this is 1790. We see the outlines of North Carolina. This is census data. The areas in gray had slaves. They just weren't under the census, so we don't know how many there were. It's not that they weren't there. As we can see, the coastal Carolina region was very intense in 1790, but as we look at the 1860 census, we see that North Carolina had a pretty heavy slave concentration all the way across. And of course, in the 1860 census, by that time, we're seeing the influence of King Cotton and the expansion of plantation economy throughout the Southeast. I bring all these up to say that many of the patterns of the past lived into the recent past. In North Carolina, we often talk of ourselves as being the birthplace of the environmental justice movement, and all of that started from a electrical transformer business that was located here in Raleigh. It was actually located in southeast Raleigh originally, but when the RDU airport was built, the promoters of the airport said, hey, we've got an industrial park out here. Let's see if we can get some of the industrial manufacturing concerns in the area to come and move here. And they convinced this group called Ward Transformer to move from southeast Raleigh out to the airport. Ward Transformer was a company that dealt with electrical transformers. If you ever look on your light pole and you see one of those big round cylindrical items, it's usually about 4 feet tall, maybe about 20 inches in diameter, sitting up on the pole. And if you ever hear that big boom in the middle of the night and all the power goes out and you wait for a while, that's usually a transformer, as they say, blowing. So there is a transformer is an important piece of electrical equipment that helps with the transmission of power from where it's generated to where it's used. Those transformers contain oil inside them, and the oil from the period of the 1930s up until the 1970s was laced with a chemical known as polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs. So these are what are referred to as forever chemicals. When they get out in the environment, they break down in periods of hundreds of years. And when they break down, they don't break down into like clean water and coffee. They break down into other forms of PCBs. They accumulate into fish, in humans that eat them. They accumulate in your liver. They cause nerve damage and cancer and other things like that. The Ward Transformer was in the business of reconditioning these transformers when they had gotten rusted or were out of commission. And Ward Transformer had accumulated a bunch of this used transformer oil as it was refurbishing these transformers. And there was a businessman who came to them and presented an opportunity. Hey, PCBs are about to become illegal, so they'll become valuable. So I'd like to make a business proposition with you that we'll get into buying up all the PCBs we can, and we'll store them in a warehouse up in New Jersey that I own, and we'll sell them to people when they need them, because they'll need them for certain activities, even though nobody will be allowed to manufacture them anymore. Buck Ward said, great. And then within 6 months, they realized that they were hemorrhaging money because there was nobody wanting to buy any of these PCB oils, and there were too many people selling them, and the price plummeted, and they were left with thousands and thousands of gallons of this oil and nowhere to store it. And so they decided, well, nobody will take this oil. What do we do with it? They put it into a tanker truck that was owned by Mr. Ward, and they created a false bottom in the truck and a spray nozzle, and they drove around rural parts of eastern North Carolina and sprayed it out of the back of the truck. 30,000 gallons, 210 rural road miles. The state of North Carolina then was stuck with what to do with this material, this contaminated soil. And what they decided to do is they looked at 90 different locations in North Carolina to try and find a place to dump all of this contaminated soil. They prosecuted Mr. Ward. They prosecuted his partner, 2 years in prison, $2 million in fines. The cost to clean up to the state was over $30 million. But they had all this contaminated soil. Where are they going to put it? They looked at 90 different sites. but the state ended up deciding to put them in Warren County. Warren County, in this particular part of Warren County too, was the part of Warren County that had a very high black population. So Warren County itself was part of that slave belt in northern North Carolina that was associated with tobacco production initially and then cotton production, that belt along the North Carolina-Virginia border. And they found on Shockoe Township an area of Warren County, not Warrenton, which was the county seat, which is where white people lived, but this rural black community, and that's where they decided to put the PCBs. Dr. Reverend Ben Chavis, Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis, who was at that time at the United Church of Christ, went down as an organizer to help. He was followed by the Warrenton police, who pulled him over for driving too slowly and arrested him. From the jailhouse, he said, "This is environmental racism." That charge stuck, and close to 800 people ended up getting arrested in a nonviolent direct action campaign to attempt to stop the landfill. There was also a legal campaign to try and stop it, a lawsuit, and a number of other issues. None of those worked. However, Warren County's political landscape changed forever because the people who organized this actually elected a slate of county commissioners who represented the county rather than just the power structure in Warrenton. And they extracted a promise from Jim Hunt, who was the outgoing governor at that time. And Governor Hunt said, well, if there's ever a way to detoxify this, the state of North Carolina will pay for it. Governor Hunt then went on to run for Senate. That didn't work out. A few years later, he comes back as governor. The technology's there. He actually lived up to the political promise, and they detoxified the landfill. But it was a result of that combined effort. And that's why we often refer to this as the birthplace of environmental justice movement ideas, because this group of average folks organizing primarily in UCC Church in Warren County got together and decided on direct action. And it was a combined campaign of political, organizational, mobilization, and legal strategy that won the day. So now I want to talk about something that has been helpful to me in some of the work that we've been doing on behalf of the Interfaith Power and Light. In 1969, there was a person who was looking at issues related to low wealth housing construction. Her name was Sherry Arnstein, and she developed a description of how political processes in general in the United States around public housing were being made, with the idea that in general public housing decisions were not being made by the people who were designed to, who public housing were going to be customers for. In other words, it was not customer focused. What do the people who are going to be in public housing want to see from their housing? Rather, it was designed around trying to keep power away from those folks. And so what she developed, what Sherry Arnstein developed, was the idea that there's a ladder up which citizens have to climb in these processes. And the ladder is increasing the ability of citizens to actually have an impact on a decision. And the first part of this ladder, the description is manipulation and therapy. That is to say, the involvement you'll have for the community there is just to give them information. So it might be an information session, it might be public service announcements, it might be ads running on the radio station that's popular in the area, or ads that might be running in a local media outlet. And therapy is just an opportunity for people to actually say something, but not actually be listened to. So that might be an opportunity to submit comments, but then those comments go in what we used to call the circular file, the trash can. Yes, thank you for your comment. Here you go. The shredder's right below me. Informing is actually when people then go to the next step of actually trying to let people know what's actually going on and what's this really about, and giving them actual information. It is an important first step towards legitimate participation, but there's really no channel for feedback. The next one is consultation. That's another thing that we think of as a legitimate attitude. But then placation, and that's when you pick one person and say, okay, yeah, we hear you. We're putting one of you on our committee, and you're here. You're in the room. So now you're in the room where it happens. Now you may be one of 17, but you're here. Be grateful that you're here. And that's where things usually stop, which is tokenism. The one above it is when you actually begin to give power to the people who are going to be directly affected in the decision making in their lives. And that's the one that we almost never see actually take place in our democracy. Which brings us to the North Carolina Utility Commission Carbon Plan Stakeholder Process. And on the left, this is, if you were curious and wanted to know how to get involved in the stakeholder process, you would have to find your way to this thing called the Utilities Commission website. Then you would have to find your way there to something called the docket search. You would have to have handy the docket number, because it's not going to tell you what you're looking for on the front page. You're going to have to know what the docket number is, and then you click on the docket number, and then you get to a nested menu. I swear, I think this thing was designed in the 1960s. It's like not even DOS based. It's like some even more primitive programming language than that. This thing is still operating on. And it's almost impossible to understand unless you know what you're looking for. And I happen to be lucky enough to have spent 2 years figuring out how to do this. And that's why when Susannah called me, I was like, yeah, I know how to look for this. We'll figure it out. So I pulled it up and I just looked at who's been involved in this docket. And this was the first day that I looked at it. And sure enough, right at the very top is Brett Breitschwart, who's from McGuire Woods, who's Duke Energy's attorney. So, when this thing was started, he was like race to the courthouse. It's like boom, before anybody else even knew this thing was open, he's on there. And then we start seeing other people start filling in there. Like Susannah said, ended up being 45 plus people. But understand that the decisions that Duke Energy is making in this docket don't just concern 45 people or even 45 groups. They concern 8 million plus customers who are in Duke Energy territory or who are in co-op territory who are purchasing nearly all of their energy from Duke Energy. So the carbon decisions made by Duke Energy influence all those people. And what we're worried about here really is what's the future of our energy system going to look like? We know what the past looks like. The past looked a lot like coal. And then it looked like coal plus some nuclear, and now it's coal, nuclear, and gas. Some hydro, but North Carolina not much. What's the future going to look like? The cost of solar has come down exponentially. If you were actually to look at the way the cost of solar is going, the cost curve on solar is pretty much matching the cost curve on memory, computer memory. It's not like other commodities. The cost of it is coming down because the manufacturing costs for electronic devices and for things like batteries and cell phone technology are very similar to solar panel construction and its control. And so the costs of solar just keep coming down, just like imagine the TV that you might have in your home if you happen to have one of those big back TVs. I used to have one. I finally got rid of my last big back TV 2 years ago. You know the kind I'm talking about? Yep. Weighs like 300 pounds. And
probably threw out your back.
yeah, throw it back trying to throw it out. Nobody wants it, right? You put it on. You could leave it in a car. Nobody would steal it because nobody wants one of those. And they cost cheaper today to buy a brand new LED flat screen that weighs, 15 pounds? That manufacturing technology is largely responsible for why solar costs have come down so low. They continue to drop. So the other thing that's very low cost is energy savings, which is the point that was being made earlier regarding to this bill around energy demand reduction. So on the when we came in, one of the things that we did on behalf of in North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, myself helping with Susannah and with a young law student who was helping me, my son, was to draft up some comments. And the comments that we drafted up basically looked at why are you not involving people more, and why are we not looking more at some of these other impacts on low rate ratepayers or low income ratepayers. One of the sick situations in our current system is that one reason why there's 45 people here is that some of these people in some of these really big law firms represent industrial customers. The poor pay the highest rates. The industrial customers get huge breaks. Duke Energy will go out and will say, hey, Google, would you like to build a data center out here in Hickory? Maybe we'll employ 35 people. We'll give you juice for 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Whereas a person, we are running on time. So one of the big issues we addressed in these comments was this issue. And so we continue to work on that. I developed a scorecard because the stakeholder process that we were involved in was so terrible. I got some students to work on developing what's called a scorecard. and I'm going to give you at the end here a link. We actually worked with community members in Duplin County, North Carolina, after we developed our scorecard to say, does this scorecard help you? If you're thinking about participating in one of these processes, what do you look for? So the scorecard is a way of simply saying, look at what you've been asked to participate in. Are you getting all of your rights met? And then they can look on the scorecard and actually check off on these boxes whether they're being told exactly what they're signing up for. Are they going to be, actually, is their feedback going to matter? Are they actually going to have opportunities? And that I'm going to give you in this last thing, which is you see here, I've got this website for at least 3 years now, and we'll be continuing to upload new information, and we're hoping to make that available through the Council of Churches and through others to any organizations that want to. And we also I'm hoping to develop this into more robust things, because this Utilities Commission process and the rules that Susannah was talking about are very bad. But what's required is to come up with a better alternative, and also tools for people to advocate for better alternatives. So that's what we've been working on. That's what we've been working on for fun. So thank you. And then we'll bring up Susannah now so we can ask questions.
You have fun working on this. Thank you. Well, you can see how
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. How lucky I am and how much I have to learn. Having access to the students and the scorecard is just going to be amazing. I've been able to show it to Southern Environmental Law Center, who also has been a partner and has been representing different groups in this same carbon plan docket. This is a long game. So what I was mentioned at lunch today about developing the strategy, this ladder of engagement, I think is something that we could really use as a tool within our communities and explain, where do you think we are in this, and then go out and figure out how to get to the next level, and also then hold our decision makers accountable and have them name where they think the level of engagement from communities actually are at. So the scorecard is to then actually document that and develop a set of environmental justice principles that become, required. And that's really why the public staff of the Utility Commission needs to be our inroad, so that they're representing the public. And as of right now, there has not been a lot of layers of engagement for us to do that. So I ran out of time a little bit of even understanding the rulemaking process around the carbon plan, because I thought as interveners, we were already involved in that, but then I learned, that they were only looking for meaningful engagement in the rulemaking, which they considered to be technical expertise. Right. And so they don't consider myself or any of you in this room as having the technical expertise, which is actually not true, because we have Gary Smith and we have Steve Jurevich and we have Carl Siegel, and all these people that have been on the NCIPL Energy Working Group for years and years and years, that have expertise in monitoring, first of all, installing, organizing, and monitoring the solar on their congregational facilities. And another piece that is very important for us all to understand, and I look forward to continuing these conversations, is as a reminder, and this is something that I've been able to really spread around the entire country and get more people involved, is that congregational facilities as nonprofits do not have any unique designation as a building type on the grid. So we're connected in all of our rate paying structures of how we pay as churches and as synagogues and as mosques and as nonprofits and as goodwill agencies out in the world are either, depending on how much of your energy consumption fits into a small to medium sized business orientation, or a large scale customer, which some of our churches actually are very large consumers of energy, especially if they're running daycare centers and having huge campuses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot going on with the rate cases. We're not going to get into that right now. There's a never ending amount of response that is required from the people about how this directly impacts us from an environmental and climate justice perspective. So these are just some of the ways to get involved. Ren made this beautiful slide when we gave some of these presentations in the past. Learn more about the issues. You're doing that. That's great. And then it doesn't stop with webinars. We have tons of resources we'll send out raising community awareness. I feel like we all need to be the ambassadors of which we seek. And we have a lot of partners. So what I often share with our collaborations that we are involved in many, I would say Ren and I, we spend 80% of our time full time with the council working collaboratively with partner organizations. What I remind partners that are experts in the subject matter is that here's the church, here's the steeple, open the door, here are the people. Like, we've got the people, but we need the content because we don't have the capacity to become experts on all of those bills and the pieces of legislation and the nuances of why this is a good bill or this is a bad bill. And so North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, the Sierra Club, Environmental Defense Fund, Center for Progressive Reform, Southern Environmental Law Center, the Duke Law Clinic, all of these are our partners that we are learning from. And then our job through that advocating with compassion pedagogy is to translate this into the moral imperative, to the values-based framework that will change hearts and minds. And one thing that we've seen over the course of the past couple of years, and we were very sad when Representative John Zoka, who was a Republican from the Fayetteville area, who was an actual leader. I mean, he was introducing clean energy policy, renewable energy, solar policy. A couple of years ago, even introduced a bill called the Energy Freedom Act in order to try to get third-party sales, which we still don't have in North Carolina. Couldn't even get an Energy Freedom Act bill passed. So that language of clean energy, of really understanding that, I know tomorrow there is going to be an advocacy day at the General Assembly from a directly impacted community for the Enviva wood pellet plants that are polluting communities, and so those directly impacted folks are going to be speaking on behalf of themselves. We want to lift up through the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusive lens, and allow communities to speak for themselves, like in Warren County, for them to become aware of what they already know, but be able to be advocates for it through that letter of engagement. So finally, we are motivated by love always. We'd like to say, if you're not doing, we serve as witnesses to leadership, to elected officials. You are there to hopefully be servants of your community. And so we are watching. We are paying attention, we are telling the truth, and guess what? If you're not doing what we like, we're going to love you out of office. So mobilizing with love, for the love of this world, join us in prophetic advocacy. And here is Ren and my contact information. We're really excited about this new, sort of reinvigoration of what it means to learn from people like Ryke and how to develop a strategy that's really going to help us win, because we know we're in sort of the last hours of democracy as we know it, and it's a real honor to be with all of you today. I know we didn't have a lot of time for questions, so maybe what we need to do is have another meeting where we can do that. But if there's anything burning, I know we want to get up. Yep, we've got 1 minute. Thank you, Ren. One burning question that has to be asked right now. So yes, I'm going to send two things, and I think I know everyone in this room. If you do not think I have your email, please give it to me or give it to Ren, and we will send out the building code sign-on support form. It's just a form you fill out from North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. And then there is a letter template that you can just send as is or change it however you would like, that will go to the public staff of the Utility Commission. And that has a short deadline because the public comment period closes on May 18th, which is on Thursday. And we are going to really check to see, what did you call the
Circular file.
The circular file. We do not want these to go into the circular file.
Yeah.
So we are, we're going to make sure because we can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Good job.
Good job.